This session will be recorded and will last 60 minutes with about 45 minutes of presentation followed by time for questions and answers. Please keep your microphone muted during the presentation and turn off your cameras. If you have a question or comment, enter it in the chat room during the presentation and it will be addressed during the question and answer period. You may also ask questions with video during the question and answer portion. All participants in today's event will have access to the recorded version, which will be available within 1 week after the live event. My name is Joshua Gordon, and I will be the moderator for today's presentation. TESOL International Association Speech Pronunciation and Listening Interest section is pleased to present this webinar titled Online-Based Intelligibility Instruction for Second Language Learners. Our speaker today is Dr. Mohamed Reza Dalman, who is an ESL instructor at Northern Arizona University. We are very pleased to welcome all of you to this webinar. And now I'll hand it over to our speaker.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much, Joshua, for your nice introduction. The topic of this presentation is on online-based intelligibility instruction for second language learners. In today's presentation, I would first provide motivation regarding why this study is important. Then I will provide a brief discussion of intelligibility instruction design. Then I will discuss how the intelligibility and comprehensibility of L2 learners were assessed in this study. Then I will discuss the findings. And at the end, I will talk about the implications, limitations, and some avenues for future research. Okay, why intelligibility instruction? As a result of globalization, the ownership of English no longer belongs to inner circle countries. The countries where English is spoken as the first language. And mutual intelligibility is considered as the key to successful communication, and it is emphasized over mastery of a specific native accent. Along the same line, there has been a transition in how pronunciation instruction is approached from a nativeness principle that focused on achieving a native-like accent as the ultimate goal of pronunciation instruction to the intelligibility principle, which emphasized intelligibility and comprehensibility as the goal of instruction. In the field of L2 speech pronunciation, has focused on investigating 3 speech constructs. The first one is comprehensibility, which is the perception of how easy or difficult it is to understand an utterance. Accentedness, which is the perception of how different a speaker's accent is from an L1 community. And intelligibility, which is how much of the listeners actually understand the intended message. Intelligibility and comprehensibility are closely related. And although these two speech constructs are closely related, they are not the same. And they are partially independent from accentedness. The focus of the present study was on to what extent online-based instruction, intelligibility instruction, improved intelligibility and comprehensibility of L2 learners. Actually, these two speech constructs are indispensable to successful communication. And the results of previous research have shown that the speech can be highly comprehensible and perfectly intelligible, even if it is strongly accented. So the focus of the present study is only on intelligibility and comprehensibility. Also, there is no consensus regarding what pronunciation targets would improve L2 speakers' intelligibility. And although several recommendations have been proposed for intelligibility instruction, they have not been tested empirically. So there is not enough empirical evidence regarding what should be taught in an intelligibility-based instruction to improve the intelligibility and comprehensibility of L2 learners. For example, previous research has recommended teaching high functional load segmentals, lexical stress, prominence, But none of those research have investigated how the instruction of all of these features conjointly improves the pronunciation proficiency of L2 learners as regards their improvement in intelligibility and comprehensibility. There are two research gaps that the present study tried to bridge. The first one is the previous research predominantly investigated the effects of segmental versus suprasegmental instruction on pronunciation development. And the previous research mostly focused on the effects of instruction on either comprehensibility or segmental and suprasegmental accuracy of L2 learners. The present study investigated to what extent an online-based instruction, which was a combination of segmental and suprasegmental instruction, improved L2 learners' intelligibility and comprehensibility, as well as segmental and suprasegmental accuracy. There are two research questions for this study. The first one is, to what extent is there a difference between the group that received online-based intelligibility instruction, referred to this group as the intelligibility group from time now, and the group that received online-based traditional instruction, referred to that as the comparison group, in intelligibility and comprehensibility gains? And the second research question asked, to what extent do the intelligibility and comprehensibility group improve specific pronunciation features from the pre to post test? This study constituted two parts. The first part was the online instruction that included a pre-test, treatment, and post-test, and the assessment part that included transcription task and comprehensibility rating. Actually, in the assessment part, the speech samples collected from the L2 learners were assessed for intelligibility and comprehensibility by the raters that I recruited. This is the overall structure of the online instruction. It had three phases. Phase one was the pre-test phase. And during the pre-test phase, I administered an online survey to all of the recruited participants, and I collected their background information. And then I set an online appointment with the recruited participants through Zoom. And during the online meeting that I had with all the participants, I explained the course details regarding what should be taught, what are the expectations, what they will learn in the course. And also during that meeting, I collected the pre-test speech sample. And in phase two, which was the online instruction phase, the recruited participants received 3 weeks of online-based instruction through two online tutors, the Intelligibility Tutor and the Segmental Tutor. And the third phase was the post-test. And similar to the pre-test phase, first I administered an online survey to the L2 learners because I wanted them to just evaluate the quality of the online course that they just took. And also I had another online appointment with them through Zoom, and I collected the post-test speech samples. The learner participants, there were a total of 60 L2 learners who were all intermediate L2 learners, and they were recruited from different IEPs, intensive English programs across the US and some other countries around the world. And their age ranged from 18 to 60, and they were predominantly female. They came from a variety of L1 backgrounds, including Chinese, Spanish, Portuguese, Hindi, French, and Korean. And the recruited participants were randomly assigned to two groups: the intelligibility group, which received online-based intelligibility instruction, and the comparison group, which received online-based traditional instruction, which was mostly segmental-based instruction. Both of the instructions were, both of the two groups received online-based instruction through two fully online tutors, which were hosted in Moodle, which is a learning management system. The intelligibility group received instruction through the intelligibility tutor, and the comparison group received instruction through the segmentals tutor. The intelligibility tutor included 6 modules, And each module focused on teaching one specific intelligibility-based pronunciation feature. The first module focused on teaching high functional note consonants. The second module focused on teaching high functional note vowels. The third one on lexical strength. The fourth one on thought grouping. The fifth one on prominence. And the last one on intonation. Each module included instructional videos, reading materials, and a range of perception and production exercises. And the Segmentals tutor, similar to the Intelligibility tutor, included 6 modules. And the first 2 modules focused on teaching English consonants. The second 2 modules focused on teaching English vowels. The fifth one focused on consonant clusters. And the last one was a review module in which the L2 learners had the chance to review all the things that they learned in the previous modules. And the focus of the segmental tutor was only teaching on segmental features, which is the focus of instruction in traditional approaches to pronunciation instruction. This is an overview of the activities within each module. Each module included an instructional video, which focused on teaching the most relevant aspects of each pronunciation lesson. A reading material that's intended to expand the learner's knowledge of each pronunciation lesson. The purpose of including instructional videos and the reading materials was to provide explicit instruction for the L2 learners for each pronunciation feature. Actually, the purpose of these materials was to raise their awareness of the pronunciation feature that they were learning. And there were some perception exercises, and the purpose of including the perception exercises was to assess the L2 learners' understanding of the content they had learned in each module, and they received immediate feedback when they completed the perception exercises. And there were also some production exercises that asked the learners to talk in response to questions, record their speech, and submit the recordings on the online platform Moodle. And there were a range of production exercises. There were controlled, guided, and communicative exercises. And I received all of the L2 learners recording, all the participants recording, and I provided them with oral corrective feedback. I just told them, for example, how much improvement they have made and how they can improve their pronunciation, and just mentioned the issues that they had with different pronunciation features. Two spontaneous speaking tasks were used in the pre and post test to collect speech samples from the L2 learners in this study. And both of these 2 speaking tasks were adapted from independent speaking task of TOEFL IBT test practice materials. The first task asked the learners to talk about the benefits that cell phones brought to people's lives. And the second task asked them to explain whether they prefer to travel with their friends or with their family. The order of these 2 speaking tasks were counterbalanced in the pre and post test, and the first 30 seconds of each speech sample was selected for intelligibility and comprehensibility judgment, as well as pronunciation analysis. To rate the intelligibility and comprehensibility of the L2 learners, I recruited 10 expert raters. And in the context of this study, expert raters referred to the raters who were studied, who were educated in applied linguistics and TESOL, and had some ESL and EFL teaching experience. The age range of the raters were from 24 to 39, and they were predominantly male. And they came from 4 L1 backgrounds, including English, Chinese, Russian, and Persian. All reported having normal hearing, and they all underwent rater training. The intelligibility was measured through a transcription task, and the comprehensibility was measured through a scalar rating technique in this study. For intelligibility transcription, I selected 3 utterances from the beginning of the 30 seconds extracted speech samples, and each utterance were of sufficiently short duration so that they could be transcribed after a single playback. Each utterance ranged from 5 to 15 words. They were short so that the raters could listen and transcribe them after listening to each utterance only one time. And comprehensibility was measured through a 5-point rubric developed originally by Isaacs et al. It was a 5-point rubric, and level 1 represented the speech that was extremely incomprehensible, and level 5 represented the speech that was completely comprehensible. The interrating reliability for the pre and post test was acceptable. In order to determine how each specific pronunciation feature improved from the pre-test to post-test, I also did some pronunciation analysis. And the focus of the pronunciation analysis was on segmentals, total, high functional note segmentals, lexical stress, pace. Pace is the number of prominent syllables divided by the number of runs. Tone choice, rising, falling, and level tone choice. Pitch range, and 2 fluency features, syllables per second and mean length of run. To answer the first research question, I used 2 linear mixed effect model for each one of the dependent variable. In the first model, the dependent variable was the intelligibility transcription scores. The fixed effects were the treatment group, intelligibility and comparison, and the time pre-test post-test. And the random effects were L2 learners and raters. In the second model, the dependent variable was the comprehensibility post-test scores. Because the 2 groups were not equal in the pre-test for comprehensibility, I only compared the post-test scores of the L2 learners. And I treated the pre-test scores as the covariate. So the dependent variable was only the comprehensibility post-test scores of the 2 groups. The fixed effects were the treatment, intelligibility, and comparison. And the random effects were L2 learners and raters. And the pretest score for the second model was considered as covariate. This is the finding for intelligibility gains of the L2 learners, which was measured through a transcription test. There was a main effect of time, as well as an interaction effect of time and treatment. The results of post-hoc analysis showed that the intelligibility group improved from the pre-test to post-test as a result of instruction, and this improvement from the pre to post-test was statistically significant. Also, the comparison group showed some improvement from the pre-test to post-test, and this improvement was also statistically significant. But something which is noticeable here was the effect of instruction, as shown by D, Cohen's D, was larger for the intelligibility group than the comparison group. So, although both the intelligibility and the comparison group improved from the pre to post test in intelligibility, the effect of instruction was larger for the intelligibility group than the comparison group. And for the comprehensibility gains, like I said before, we compared only the post-test scores of the L2 learners. And the result was statistically significant. The intelligibility group outperformed the comparison group in the post-test in comprehensibility, which means that the intelligibility group was perceived to be more comprehensible, more easy to understand in the post-test compared to the comparison group. And the effect of instruction was medium to large. The comparison group, however, did not make it a lot of improvement from the pre to post test. To answer the second research question regarding to what extent each one of those pronunciation features improved from the pre-test to post-test, we conducted some pre-test, some per sample t-tests, each for one dependent variable. This is the result of the per sample t-test for each one of the features from pre to post-test. For segmentals, the result showed that both the intelligibility and the comparison group improved from the pre to post-test in segmentals. That means that they had fewer segmental deviations from the pre to post-test. However, the effect of instruction was larger for the intelligibility group than the comparison group. There was no significant improvement for high functional note consonants for the 2 groups. However, for high functional note vowels, again, the 2 groups make significant improvement from the pre-test to post-test. However, the effect of instruction was larger for the comparison group than the intelligibility group. And for lexical stress, only the intelligibility group showed significant improvement from the pre-test to post-test. And the comparison group, which received no explicit instruction on lexical stress, did not show any improvement from the pre-test to post-test. And for pace, I mean the number of prominent syllables, again, the intelligibility group, which received explicit instruction on prominence, shows significant improvement from pre to post-test, and the effective instruction was medium to large. On the other hand, the comparison group, which received no instruction on prominence and pace, showed no improvement from pre-test to post-test. For pitch range, there was not a significant improvement for intelligibility and comparison group from the pre to post-test. And for rising and for tone choice, only a level tone choice showed significant improvement for the intelligibility group. In other words, the intelligibility group that received instruction on tone choice and intonation produced fewer level tones in the post-test. However, the comparison group that received no instruction on intonation showed no improvement in intonation and tone choice. And the results for rising tones and falling tone choice were not significant for intelligibility and comparison group. And for fluency features, I mean syllables per second and mean length of run, neither the intelligibility group nor the comparison group showed a significant improvement from the pre to post test. What do these all mean? Okay, first, for intelligibility, there was a significant improvement for both groups, both the intelligibility and the comparison group. This is because transcription technique, which was used as a measure of intelligibility in this study, is a local approach that measures intelligibility at the phonemic level. This means that any kind of segmental deviations in the L2 speech of the L2 learners would affect the intelligibility of the L2 speakers. As the result of the pronunciation analysis showed, both the intelligibility and the comparison group produced fewer segmental deviations in the post-test than the pre-test. However, it is interesting that the improvement of the intelligibility group was more noticeable compared to the comparison group. This finding could be attributed to the instruction that the intelligibility group received on the lexical stress. Lexical stress is another word-based feature that influences the intelligibility at the phoneme level. In this study, as the results of the pronunciation analysis showed, the intelligibility group improved significantly from the pre to post-test. It means they had more accurate lexical stress in the post-test. On the other hand, the comparison group did not show any improvement because they did not receive an instruction on lexical stress. So the more noticeable improvement of the intelligibility group in intelligibility could be attributed to the instruction that they received on the lexical stress as well as the segmentals. And what do these findings suggest? These findings suggest that both segmentals and lexical stress are important when intelligibility is measured through a transcription test. And the intelligibility instruction has been effective in improving the intelligibility of the L2 learners, because the intelligibility group, which received online-based intelligibility instruction, could improve in intelligibility significantly from the pre to post test. And for comprehensibility gains, the intelligibility group outperformed the comparison group in the post test. And but why is it the fact? The comprehensibility rating is strongly associated with suprasegmentals and segmentals, as well as especially high functional load segmentals. In this study, the intelligibility group received instruction on high functional load segmentals and suprasegmental features. And as the results of pronunciation analysis showed, the intelligibility group that received instruction on suprasegmentals could improve lexical stress, pace, and level tones. However, the comparison group that received no instruction on suprasegmentals did not show any significant improvement on each one of these suprasegmental features. What do these findings suggest? One, the suprasegmental features which were selected for instruction in this study are important for comprehensibility, because as a result of instruction, the comprehensibility of the L2 learners in the intelligibility group significantly improved from the pre to post test. Also, the suprasegmentals that are important for comprehensibility are learnable. The results of this study showed that pace, lexical stress, and level tone choice improved from the pre to post test, and overall, the L2 speakers of the intelligibility group were perceived to be more comprehensible as a result of instruction. So those features that are important for comprehensibility are to some extent learnable. And the intelligibility instruction has been effective in improving the comprehensibility of L2 learners. Okay, this study has some important pedagogical implications. The first one is both segmentals and suprasegmentals should be included in intelligibility-based instruction. However, teachers should be selective. Previously, mostly teachers were actually wondering what they should include in the instruction, and I've always been thinking about either including segmentals or suprasegmentals. And when they even considered including both of these features in their instruction, they were not actually certain what features to include in their instruction. The findings of this research showed both segmental and suprasegmental features are important. However, because the time of the class, the time allocated teaching pronunciation in ESL class is limited, teachers should be selective in what features they select for instruction. However, they should include both segmentals and suprasegmental features. And also, some intelligibility features are more learnable and likely to improve more quickly as a result of instruction. The finding of pronunciation analysis showed that some features like lexical stress, prominence, and level tone choice improved after a short-term pronunciation instruction, 3 weeks of pronunciation instruction. On the other hand, some other features like fluency features, pitch range, rising and falling tone choice did not significantly improve from the pre to post test. So this is another thing that L2 teachers should consider when they're making curricular decisions, especially if they want to allocate a short amount of time to teaching pronunciation in their ESL classes. They can include those features that are more likely to improve as a result of short period of pronunciation instruction. Also, the findings of this research showed that a fully online class can be as effective as a regular face-to-face class. This is promising because pronunciation is one of those sub-skills that have been ignored in most ESL classes. And the teachers were just like to spend more time on teaching some other sub-skills such as grammar and vocabulary and skills such as reading and writing. And the findings of this research showed even if the teachers are not willing to spend some time on teaching pronunciation in their classes, if they design an online pronunciation course for their students, it is likely to improve their pronunciation. Also, because of the COVID-19, that most of the institutions switched to online classes, the findings of this research showed online instruction could provide promising results and could be really effective in improving the intelligibility and comprehensibility of the L2 learners, which are two indispensable components of successful communication. Also, this finding showed a short-term online pronunciation course could have a beneficial effect. The duration of this online pronunciation course was only 3 weeks. However, after this 3 weeks of online-based instruction, there was a significant improvement in intelligibility and comprehensibility of the L2 learners. So the findings of this study could be promising. And the findings of this research also has some implications for L2 pronunciation teachers and teacher training. Like I said before, traditionally, most of the L2 pronunciation teachers, not all, when it comes to teaching pronunciation, they're always wondering what they need to include in their instruction. Do they need to teach pronunciation? Or if they want to teach, what features to include and how to teach those features? Based on the findings of this research, they can provide some training programs for L2 pronunciation teachers and provide them with this information regarding what features are important and matter for intelligibility and comprehensibility, and how to prioritize those features and how to teach them. For teaching the pronunciation features in this study, I used explicit instruction and a range of perception and production exercises. And a combination of explicit instruction and those perception and production exercises just showed that they were successful and resulted in some improvements in the pronunciation of L2 learners. So this is something that can be included in teacher training programs for future teachers or those who are teaching pronunciation. This study is also marked by some limitations. The first one is the proficiency level of the L2 learners. Although I exercised meticulous care to select the L2 learners who were all at intermediate level of proficiency, the results of my research showed that the L2 learners were not necessarily all intermediate. And in this study, in order to make sure that the L2 learners were all intermediate, I selected the L2 learners based on their scores on the proficiency, international proficiency tests, such as the TOEFL IBT test, speaking section, IELTS test, speaking section, or Duolingo test. And although based on the results of this, their scores, they were all within the range of intermediate level, the findings of my research showed that they were not all the same. So this is something that needs to be considered in the future research, and maybe a more rigorous method should be applied when they're selecting the participants for the research. And the second limitation is the absence of the delayed post-test. There was a short time frame between the end of the intervention and the administration of the post-test. One, learning has a delayed effect. Sometimes students learn something, but they need some time to process what they have learned. And in this study, it was not feasible to have a delayed post-test because I couldn't reach to most of the students after the course was finished. But it is interesting that in the future research, we have a delayed post-test to see to what extent the findings of what the students have learned will remain after some period of time. And also the length of instruction in this study was short. There was only 3 weeks of explicit pronunciation instruction. That's why some of the pronunciation features, such as the fluency features, pitch range, and rising and falling tone choice, did not show significant improvement. Although they improved to some extent, this improvement did not achieve a statistical significance. So something that might need to be investigated in the future research is to provide the intelligibility-based instruction, online-based intelligibility-based instruction, but for a longer period of time, maybe for 5 or 6 weeks, and see to what extent those features would improve from the pre to post test, and to what extent there is more significant improvement in the intelligibility and comprehensibility of all learners. At the end, I want to express my acknowledgement to language learning for providing research funding for this study. Also to my professors, Dr. Kang, Dr. Jesse Egbert, Dr. Luke Plonsky, and Dr. Lucy Pickering for providing me with feedback on several drafts of this paper. The feedback were all invaluable, and definitely I could not make this paper possible without their insightful comments. And also want to acknowledge the webinar organizers, Dr. Joshua Gordon and Dr. Megan Mora. Thank you so much for your attention. And if you have any questions or comments, I really welcome those questions.
Thank you, Dr. Dahlman, for such an interesting presentation. And now we open up for questions, and we actually have a couple of them in here. One is, have the results been published anywhere?
Actually, this is part of my PhD dissertation, and the results is now in ProQuest, and I think it will be out maybe soon. But I'm working on just some papers to publish in some journal articles. But the only publication that will be available is on ProQuest as my PhD dissertation. And yeah, I'm working on some papers, but they will be maybe in the future available.
Mm-hmm. We have another couple of questions here. It says, do you think the effects might have been affected by individual differences of the learners? Did you gather some data on whether the students enjoyed and found the course effective, or why not? Here it says, if you're still in touch with the students, maybe you could take a look at some of their IDs and correlate them with their progress. Yeah, the question is, do you think the effects might have been affected by individual differences of the learners?
Yeah, that's a very good question. First, let me get back to the first part of the question that asked how the L2 learners evaluated the online pronunciation course. Actually, I just administered an online survey in which I asked the L2 learners about their perceptions of the online pronunciation course. I mean, how they found it useful, if, I mean, how, to what extent the exercises were effective. And I did not include that in this presentation, but based on the findings that I collected from the L2 learners, the majority of the L2 learners in this study, both in the intelligibility and the comparison group, perceived the online pronunciation course to be highly effective. And more than 50% of the L2 learners preferred the online pronunciation course to a face-to-face class because of different reasons. For example, some of them said that they preferred this online pronunciation course because they could just learn pronunciation at the comfort of their own room. And some others said that they had the opportunity to do the exercises several times and receive feedback, and they could just watch the videos, go back and forth, but in the classes, there were not the opportunities for them. So as far as the perception of the L2 learners of the L2 pronunciation, the online pronunciation course is concerned, yeah, the majority of the L2 learners were satisfied with the quality of the course, and more than 50% of them preferred this online course to any face-to-face class. And for the second part of the question about individual differences, this is a very good question. Let me get back to one of my slides. I think it was this slide. Yeah. And this is the conditional R2. The conditional R2 here is the variance accounted for by the fixed effect and the random effect. Actually, as the result showed, around 20% of the variance in the intelligibility score was associated to the L2 raters and the L2 learners variables. It can be, their individual differences, their L1 background, the training that they had. I have some data about, because in this study, my participants came from different L1 backgrounds. I had, if I'm not mistaken, I had 15 L1 backgrounds, and I have those data, but I have not investigated to what extent those individual differences might have affected the findings of this study. But based on this conditional R2, it showed that around 20% of the variance in this result might be affected by the individual differences. Yeah, this is a good question, and this might be something that I need to consider in the future research. But because I have the data, I can do this. Thank you for this very insightful question.
And we have another question here. It says, what is your justification for choosing the TOEFL, IELTS, and Duolingo tests to estimate proficiency?
Actually, that's a very good question, because the participants who just I recruited were either international students who were in the US, or those students who had the plan to come to the US in the near future. The only data available from them to determine the proficiency level was their scores on the international proficiency test. And yeah, another reason that I use these scores, because international proficiency tests are reliable and valid measures of L2 speakers, L2 learners' proficiency. And I thought that considering these scores might be a reliable way to screen the students who can participate in this study. But I've published another paper that showed even those who receive a complete score on the TOEFL IBT test vary in their comprehensibility and intelligibility. So the findings of this research shows maybe even those who receive a complete score, a high score in the intelligibility or comprehensibility, in the proficiency test of the TOEFL IBT or other proficiency tests, might not be all perceived to be equally comprehensible and intelligible. But yeah, get back to your question. I did this because it was the only data that students had at the time of participating in this research.
There is a follow-up question of the same question. It says, do you think that Duolingo scores are really comparable to TOEFL and IELTS scores?
That's a very good question. This is something that I think needs some more investigation. there's some degree of correlation between TOEFL IBT test speaking score and IELTS test speaking score. However, I'm not quite sure if there is any study that investigated to what extent the speaking scores of the Duolingo test correlates with those of IELTS and TOEFL IBT. This is a very good question, and I'm not sure if there has been any studies that have been conducted in the field, or not that I am aware of. A good question.
Okay. And another question here says, did you create the online instruction models? Are they available publicly for ESL, EFR teachers?
Actually, for developing the online pronunciation course, I use different sources available. For example, I use Baker's, I use Pickering, I use Hewing's. I mean, I just selected the materials available in different commercial pronunciation books, and I actually compiled them and included them in the Intelligibility Tutor for each module. They are not available publicly, but when my dissertation comes out on ProQuest, in the appendix part of my dissertation, I've put what I included in each module. And if you refer to the appendix part, it can give you an idea of the exercises I did for each, that I included for each module, and what type of reading materials I had for each sessions.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. We have another question. It says, did all the raters have a similar amount of exposure to foreign accent? Do you think that raters L1 background might have affected the results in some way? What did rater training involve?
Okay, that's a very good question. First, I get back to the first part of the question. Actually, I collected some accent familiarity for each one of the raters, and the results showed that there was not a significant correlation between the degree of accent familiarity and their intelligibility and comprehensibility judgments. This is something that I did. And for the training, actually, because let me show this. Slide, okay. The rater training session, in the rater training session, what I did was first, I explained the L2 learners what the difference between intelligibility and comprehensibility was, because these are two constructs that for the most part are confused by even the expert raters. First, I provided a definition of these two constructs and how different they were. Then I had this analytic rubric, that was developed by Isaacs et al. And I explained each one of those levels. And in order to make sure that the raters had a clear idea of, what level 1 means, what level 2 means, what levels 3 and 4 and 5 means, I provided some speech sample that represented each one of these levels. And we did some practice. For example, I played level 1. I said, this is level 1 sample. This is the speech that is slightly comprehensible. The speech that requires some effort. And they listened to 5 samples for each level. And after we did all of this training, all of the raters did ratings for 20 speech samples. And I then compared the ratings with those of mine, and all of those ratings, and there was not a lot of difference between, because after the training, they were all calibrated, and there was only one instance in which one of the raters, there was 2-point difference between my rating and his rating. For example, I gave the speaker 3 and he gave 5. There was only one instance of this. And before I give the rater the rating for the final ratings, I had a meeting with the rater, and we talked about the rating, and then we calibrated that. This is what, briefly speaking, this is what the rater training included.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. I do have a question too. You mentioned that there was no significant improvement in terms of fluency. Do you have any ideas of why this happened?
Yeah, that's a very good question. This is the findings for the fluency features. For syllables per second, actually, the intelligibility group showed some improvement. but the improvement was not significant. The comparison group, on the other hand, for the syllables per second, they not only were not fluent, but they just were slower in speaking. And for mean length of run, again, the intelligibility group, of course, was able to produce longer stretches of a speech between each pause, but it did not reach a statistical significance. On the other hand, the comparison group was the opposite. They produced shorter stretches of a speech between each run. I think one of the reasons, because the results of the previous research have shown that fluency features improve even if there is not explicit instruction on the pronunciation feature. But all of those previous research that showed improvement in the fluency features were, the study involved 15 weeks of, for example, exposure, or one semester exposure, or 2 or 3 month exposure. I think what I just mentioned, I think one of the reasons that I might explain why the two groups did not improve, why the intelligibility group did not improve significantly in fluency feature, might be because of the short period of instruction. Probably if the speakers had received a longer period of instruction and had done more activities, maybe they would have shown a significant improvement in the fluency feature. And I didn't have this opportunity to administer delayed post-test. Maybe if I had the delayed post-test, the result would show that to what extent maybe the fluency increases after the immediate post-test that was administered. Yeah, to get back to your question, I think one of the reasons might be because of the short period of instruction that did not let them improve their fluency to a great extent.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see if anyone else has any other questions, some last questions before we finish. Well, this brings us to the conclusion of today's webinar, Online-Based Intelligibility Instruction for Second Language Learners. A special thanks to our presenter, Dr. Dahlman. Thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. And this concludes the webinar. Thank you for joining us today.